Chapter 1. A Prophetic Dream. Imagine, the creator of the cosmos chose, from among his numberless galaxies and spinning stars, one tiny rock of a planet on which to enter human life in the most natural and self-effacing of ways, through the womb of an unwed teenage girl. His was one of many births that night, no doubt, but it was unique. God became a wailing, wrinkled newborn, birthed onto the bloody straw of life on our sin-sick planet. Perhaps only the angels knew what they were really witnessing. Their voices rang through the heavens, singing, "Glory to God in the highest. Glory to God for the gift of His Son. Glory to God for the cosmos dwarfing love that led to the birth of a king in a rough stable." There is a sense of prophetic mystery surrounding Christ's birth. The story reveals something divine to us. It drives our quest to look closely at our own stories. Who are we? Why are we? How do we? Where in the midst of our questions is this Emmanuel, this God with us? Missing out. Sadly, for all our questioning, the mystery of the Incarnation escapes us. Jesus comes in His first advent into the midst of our great sin and suffering. This was God's design. But apart from the angels, nudging a few scared shepherds and a cryptic star, decoded by a handful of distant astrologists, almost everyone else missed it. Missing out should feel familiar. Most of us habitually miss it every year at Christmas. Our story is consumption and consumerism, and we're obsessed with the climax. We worship less, we spend more, we give less, we struggle more. Less, more less. Time and nerve stretch thin, and we reduce family and friends to a card or a present that costs the right amount to prove our level of love. Our quest to celebrate mystery exhausts us. Another Christmas passes by like a blizzard, and we're left to shovel through the trash of our failure. Missing the prophetic mystery of Jesus' birth means missing God with us, God beside us, God becoming one of us. Missing out on Jesus changes everything. Back to the stable. Several years ago, a few of us friends were lamenting how much we hate pastoring at Christmas. We shared our dread of preparing to proclaim, celebrate, and worship Jesus at His incarnation, while we, along with our congregations, are consumed with idolatry. We become lost in crowded malls, financial debt, and endless lists of gifts to buy. The false doctrine of consumer religion insists again and again that money equals love, a convincing enough tale to make believers out of non-Christians and Christians alike. We were afraid that on Christmas Day, God would come near, as He always does and always is, and we would miss it yet again. So we decided to try an experiment. What if, instead of acting like bystanders to the Nativity, we led our congregations into the Nativity story as participants? We didn't know what to expect, but we knew we needed to reclaim the story of Christmas, the foundational narrative of the church, as we strove to see the birth of Christ from inside the stable instead of inside the mall. Our holiday practices began to change. If it doesn't take money to love, a recalculation is needed. If love is to be the driving force of our gift giving, then money cannot be. Our dominating culture of consumerism can and must be rejected. When we refuse to equate money with love, we become free to leave the shallow story of cultural Christmas and enter the deep, life-giving waters of the Incarnation, free to give without comparison, receive with gratitude, and worship with abandon. Children understand the creative joy of making gifts, the excitement of giving themselves away. Watching our own children and receiving their love, we remembered that we didn't need a price tag to quantify our love. Spending less freed us to give more. We replaced material presents with the gift of presence. We learned to give our time, our talents, our love, and ourselves to one another. We were convinced that an inescapable consequence of truly entering the Christmas story was compulsion to love all. We were reminded that Jesus' teaching, that whenever we see a brother or sister hungry or cold, whatever we do to the least of these, so we do to him. To love Jesus, we needed to love and serve the outcast, poor, and ignored among us. In our local schools, in Liberian villages, and under highway overpasses as the mechanisms of progress sped by. Spending less gave us the resources to make a huge difference. And the greatest resource was the presence of Christ within us. With our new freedom of time space and mind space, our attention was more fully focused on Jesus coming. For the first time in many years, we felt as if we were on our knees in the dirt beside the manger, worshiping with the shepherds. Jesus was being experienced among us in living, transforming, beautiful, and fresh ways. And the stories of changed lives multiplied greater than we could ever imagine. Nothing seemed impossible for God. And it didn't stop at Christmas. Dreaming bigger dreams. When we considered that the coming of Christ was good news for all people, we began to realize that meant everyone. Not just our friends and neighbors, but everyone. All people, for all time. So we began to think of how this announcement could show up in tangible ways all over the world. One of our friends began to be burdened about the world water crisis. The water crisis around the world is staggering. Hundreds of children die simply because they don't have access to clean drinking water. It makes our mouths drop and our stomachs turn when we realize that the amount of money we spend on Christmas in America is close to 45 times the amount of money it would take to supply the entire world with clean water. What if some of the money we spent at Christmas was used to dig wells for poor or remote communities in which people die regularly from the lack of clean water? So partnering with Living Water International, we used the money we saved from worshiping more and spending less to build many wells. We will never forget receiving the email telling us that the water crisis in Mount Barkley, Liberia was solved. Children splashing the fresh water and praising God simply because people on the other side of the world began to be more faithful to the message of Christmas. Over the last few years, we traveled at Christmas to these villages with new wells to celebrate the hope of Jesus with them. Imagine children dancing and shouting as clean water gushes into the air. Picture people worshiping Jesus with cup after cup, living water for our souls, clean water for our bodies. Consider that each well was drilled with money that was rightly given as a birthday gift to our liberating King. It wasn't just wells either. There were tangible local expressions that the announcement of Christ was good news to the least of these in our own communities. One church threw open the doors at a local school so 150 of the poorest families in their community could come and receive clothing, food, and some simple gifts for their kids. People hung out and wrapped presents and played with kids so the parents could shop. As one person described it, we felt it in the air that Christmas really can still change the world. Believing that, we dreamed even bigger. What if we invited more faith communities to join us? We put together a few $1,000s, launched a website, and invited others to join the Advent conspiracy Jesus began so many years ago on a night in Bethlehem. The story caught on, and people joined us. Hundreds of churches began to worship fully, spend less, give more, and love all. It became a movement that is still growing today. Churches all over the world are joining the Advent conspiracy and discovering Jesus in a way that is changing lives. Entering the story was harder than we thought, more meaningful than we dared to dream, and one of the most beautiful encounters with Jesus that many of us have ever experienced. Now, tens of thousands of people all over the world are meeting the King born in a stable and serving his beloved, needy children. This book is about the prophetic dream birthed by the advent of Jesus Christ. The dream that every Jesus follower would worship fully, spend less, give more, and courageously love all in the name and power of Jesus. We refuse to be defined by our culture. Instead, emboldened by the Spirit, we are recreating culture in the name of the good, the true, and the beautiful Jesus Christ. A story, not a system. The Advent conspiracy is not a 4-point checklist for how to do Christmas. It is not a formula or a foolproof system to make your Christmas more meaningful. The Advent conspiracy is the story of the wondrous moment when God entered our world to make things right. It is the greatest story ever told, and it changes everything, including the way we celebrate Christmas. As you read this book, understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. This is not about anger, disgust, or guilt. It is about entering the story of Jesus more deeply with a desire to worship more fully. It is not enough to say no to the way Christmas is celebrated by many. We need to say yes to a different way of celebrating. Our dream is that as you read this book, you will discover Christ and be transformed by entering his story. The idea is simple, yet sometimes it is simple ideas that change our lives in the best way possible. The message of Jesus can still change the world. We continue to conspire together and discover new and creative ways in which Jesus can liberate the world. Will you write your life into his story? Will you join the prophetic dream?